When the HOA demanded a key to my private lakefront gate for community access, I had no idea it would uncover years of corruption, embezzlement, and criminal activity that would rock our entire neighborhood. Would you believe the path to justice began with a simple padlock? I still remember the exact moment when my peaceful life at Cedar Lake turned into a nightmare. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon when the doorbell rang, interrupting my work-from-home schedule. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I spotted Jennifer Wilson, the Maple Springs HOA president, standing on my porch with her arms crossed. Her signature pearl necklace gleamed in the sunlight as she tapped her foot impatiently. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "Hello, Jennifer. What brings you here today?" I asked, trying to sound friendly despite our rocky history. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "The board had an emergency meeting last night about your new gate," she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You've blocked the lake access path that everyone has used for decades." I blinked, genuinely confused. "That path is on my property. I checked the deed when I bought this house last year." "Well, that's why I'm here," Jennifer said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "The board voted unanimously. You need to provide us with a key to your gate immediately. Homeowners are complaining they have to walk an extra 10 minutes around to reach the lake." My stomach tightened. I had installed that gate after finding beer cans and trash on my property 3 weekends in a row. People had been treating my yard like a public park. "Jennifer, I'm sorry, but I checked with the county. The property maps clearly show that path is private. It belongs to me. It's not a community shortcut." Her face flushed red. "That path has been used by residents since before you were born. There's such a thing as established use, you know." "Actually," I countered, "I spoke with my lawyer before installing the gate. There's no easement on my deed, and posting no trespassing signs for the past 6 months prevents any claim of established use." Jennifer's eyes narrowed dangerously. "The HOA bylaws state that all homeowners must maintain community aesthetics and access. Your gate violates Section 7. "Section 7 covers community property," I replied, grateful I'd read the entire boring document when I moved in. "My land isn't community property." Jennifer stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Listen carefully. The board has ways of making things very uncomfortable for difficult homeowners. Last year, David Thompson fought us on his fence height. He ended up with $12,000 in fines and a lien on his house. Just give us the key, and this all goes away." A chill ran down my spine. Was she threatening me? "I think we're done here, Jennifer. If the HOA wants to discuss this further, you can contact my attorney." I handed her my lawyer's business card and gently closed the door as she sputtered in outrage. Through the window, I watched her storm down my front path, phone already pressed to her ear. I immediately called my lawyer and explained the situation. "Document everything," he advised. "If they keep pushing, we'll need evidence." That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a security alert. I grabbed it and froze. The app showed 3 figures at my back gate. I recognized Jennifer's distinctive blonde bob, along with Robert Davis, the HOA treasurer, and Michael Thompson, the facilities manager. Robert was holding something that glinted in the security light. Was that a bolt cutter? I hit record on the app and called the police. "There are people attempting to break into my property," I told the dispatcher, my voice shaking. By the time I threw on clothes and hurried downstairs, my doorbell rang again. A police officer stood there, flashlight in hand. "I'm Officer James," he said. "We got a call about trespassers." I showed him the security footage, still recording. "That's the HOA board members trying to break my lock." Officer James frowned. "Let's go take a look." We walked around to my back gate. No one was there, but my padlock had deep scratch marks on it. The officer shined his light around, revealing footprints in the soft soil. "I'll need to file a report," he said. "This is attempted breaking and entering." As he wrote up the report, headlights swept across my driveway. A silver SUV parked, and Jennifer stepped out with Robert. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," Jennifer called out sweetly. "We were just checking on community property that this homeowner has illegally blocked off." Officer James looked between us. "Ma'am, according to county records, this is private property. You were recorded attempting to damage a lock on private property after hours." Jennifer's face hardened. "This is an HOA matter, not a police matter. We have bylaws." "Bylaws don't override state law, ma'am," Officer James interrupted. "I suggest you consult with your HOA attorney before taking any further action that could be considered criminal trespassing or vandalism." After they left, Officer James turned to me. "Keep that camera running. If they come back, call us immediately." I barely slept that night. The next morning, my inbox contained 5 separate HOA violation notices. For my hedge height, mailbox color, unapproved garden border, excessive water usage, and improper security modifications. Each violation carried a $100 daily fine. The battle lines had been drawn. I had no idea how ugly things would get, or that my simple gate would unlock secrets that would shake our entire community to its core. At 6:30 a.m., my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Texts flooded in from neighbors I barely knew. "Did you see what they posted about you? Are you really blocking lake access? The emergency meeting tonight is about your property." I rubbed my tired eyes and opened the Maple Springs Community app. There it was, a special announcement from Jennifer. Urgent. Homeowner blocks historic lake access. Emergency meeting. Tonight, 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. All homeowners must attend. Below was a photo of my gate with a caption claiming I was destroying community value and privatizing access that generations of residents have enjoyed. My hands shook with anger. The post had 47 comments already, most from people I'd never met, calling me selfish and demanding the HOA take action. I called my lawyer, Mark Simmons, while brewing coffee. "They're turning the neighborhood against me," I explained, "and these violation notices are clearly retaliation." "Take photos of your property," Mark advised. "Document that nothing violates actual code. I'll draft a cease and desist letter today. Meanwhile, get a copy of your property survey from county records." I took the day off work and drove to the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter looked up when I explained what I needed. "Maple Springs HOA issue?" she asked knowingly. I nodded, surprised. She lowered her voice. "You're not the first. The HOA has tried claiming private lakefront properties as community access for years. They even attempted to alter the county zoning maps back in 2018. My jaw dropped. "They what?" "It got rejected, but they keep trying," she said, printing my property records. "Here's your deed, survey, and property tax history. See this line? It clearly shows your property extends to the lakeshore with no easements or right-of-way markings." Armed with official documents, I felt more confident. I spent the afternoon taking dated photos of my perfectly compliant property features, then filmed a walkthrough of the path to prove it was within my property lines. At 4:30 p.m., I returned from picking up groceries to find my gate lock destroyed. A shiny new padlock had replaced mine, with a note taped nearby: "Community access restored. Contact HOA office for your key." I stood there in shock, grocery bags hanging from my hands. They had actually destroyed my property in broad daylight. I called the police immediately. Officer Reynolds arrived, a different officer from the night before. He photographed the damaged lock, the replacement, and the note. "This is vandalism and criminal trespassing," he confirmed. "Would you like to press charges?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation, "and I want a restraining order against the board members." As Officer Reynolds wrote his report, my elderly neighbor, Grace Mitchell, shuffled down the path from her adjacent property. Her face looked worried beneath her gardening hat. "I saw them," she whispered. Jennifer, Robert, and that handyman they hired. They used bolt cutters around noon. I have it on my bird-watching camera." I could have hugged her. "Grace, would you be willing to tell the officer what you saw?" She nodded firmly. "I'm tired of their bullying. They threatened to fine me last month because my birdbath was an unapproved water feature. I've had that birdbath for 23 years. Grace's testimony and video evidence strengthened my case considerably. Officer Reynolds promised to follow up with the HOA board members. "We'll need to question them today," he said. "Destruction of private property is a serious offense." As the police car pulled away, my phone rang with an unknown number. "This is Robert Davis," said the tense voice of the HOA treasurer. "You've made a serious mistake involving the police. We're prepared to forgive the gate issue if you drop the charges immediately." "You destroyed my property," I replied. "That's a crime, not an HOA violation." "Listen carefully." Robert's voice dropped lower. "Jennifer knows people at your workplace. Your manager plays golf with her husband every Sunday. Think about what matters more, a stupid gate or your career." The threat hung in the air between us. I ended the call without responding, my hands shaking again, but this time with rage rather than fear. I drove to the hardware store, bought the strongest lock they had, and replaced the HOA's padlock with my own. Then I posted new security cameras at different angles and hung a laminated sign: "Private property. All trespassers will be prosecuted. Area under 24-hour video surveillance." At 6:45 p.m., cars began filling the clubhouse parking lot for the emergency meeting. I arrived with Mark, my attorney, carrying folders of documentation. The room fell silent as we entered. Jennifer stood at the podium, microphone in hand, her expression flickering between surprise and fury. "This is a private homeowners meeting," she announced. "Outside parties aren't welcome." Mark stepped forward. "I'm representing my client, who is a homeowner and has every right to attend with counsel." Whispers spread through the room. Many residents looked confused. "Furthermore," Mark continued, addressing the crowd, "this meeting violates your own bylaws, requiring 2 weeks' notice for any official HOA meeting. Any votes taken tonight would be invalid and actionable." Jennifer's knuckles whitened around the microphone. "We're simply having an informational discussion about community access." A loud knock interrupted her. Officer Reynolds entered with 2 other police officers. "Jennifer Wilson, Robert Davis, and Michael Thompson," he called out. "We need to speak with you regarding an incident of property destruction reported earlier today." The room erupted into chaos. Residents started shouting questions. Someone near me muttered, "They never told us that path was private property." As the police escorted the board members outside, I noticed Grace slip me a folded paper. I opened it discreetly. "Check the HOA financial reports," her shaky handwriting read. "Lake access line item, $5,000 last year. Where did the money go? No maintenance was done." I looked up at Grace, who nodded gravely. Suddenly, I realized this fight wasn't just about my gate anymore. Something much bigger was hiding behind that lock. My phone rang at 6:30 a.m. the next morning. It was Grace, my elderly neighbor who lived 3 doors down. "They're outside your house," she whispered. "Jennifer and the whole HOA board. They look angry." I peeked through my blinds and saw them. 5 people in business casual clothes, huddled on my driveway, blocking my car. Jennifer stood in front, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. "Thanks for the warning, Grace," I said, my stomach twisting into knots. I needed to get to work, but this confrontation was unavoidable. I grabbed my phone, opened the recording app, and pressed record. Something told me I'd need evidence of whatever was about to happen. With a deep breath, I stepped outside into the cool morning air. "Good morning," I said calmly, though my heart was racing. "Is there a reason you're all blocking my driveway?" Jennifer stepped forward, her perfect blonde bob not moving an inch despite the breeze. "Remove that police report immediately," she demanded, her voice low and threatening. "The board has unanimously decided that your actions are hostile to community interests." "What that means," added Robert, the treasurer, whose round glasses couldn't hide his cold eyes, "is that we're giving you one chance to be reasonable before this gets unpleasant." I held my phone visibly, making sure they saw it was recording. "Are you threatening me? Because that's what it sounds like." "We're protecting community interests," Robert replied, adjusting his tie. "That path has been used for 20 years. It's a tradition." "Not legally," I countered. "And not anymore. The property survey clearly shows—" "Nobody cares about your survey," Jennifer snapped, stepping closer. "Do you have any idea who I am in this community? My husband plays golf with the mayor. I chair 3 charity committees." The others nodded solemnly, as if her social status somehow changed property law. "That's wonderful," I replied evenly. "But it doesn't give you the right to break into my property or install locks on my gate." A red-faced man I recognized as Doug, the landscaping committee head, jabbed a finger toward me. "You're making powerful enemies here. Think about what that means for your future in Maple Springs." "I'm going to be late for work," I said, walking toward my car. "Please move aside." They reluctantly parted, but Jennifer wasn't finished. She handed me an official-looking envelope. "Special assessment. The board voted last night. Your property requires additional security measures due to your difficulties. $500 due by Friday." I took the envelope without opening it. "My lawyer will be reviewing this. Now, if you'll excuse me." As I drove away, I watched them in my rearview mirror, huddled together and whispering. My hands shook on the steering wheel. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. At work, I could barely focus. During lunch, I called my lawyer and forwarded the recording. Then I called Officer Reynolds to update him on the situation. "They can't issue special assessments targeted at specific homeowners," my lawyer explained. "That's discriminatory enforcement. Keep documenting everything." I was just finishing up a project when my phone lit up with messages. 12 texts from neighbors, all saying the same thing: "Emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m. The strange part? I hadn't received any notification, despite being a homeowner. Grace called me, her voice trembling. "I just got back from my doctor's appointment, and there are signs all over the neighborhood about an emergency meeting. But when I called Jennifer to ask what it was about, she said it was for homeowners in good standing only." A chill ran down my spine. "What are they planning, Grace?" "I don't know," she whispered. "But Nate from down the street said they're voting on something big. He overheard Jennifer on the phone saying they needed to make an example." Then came the bombshell. "They're voting to put a lien on your house," Grace exclaimed, her voice cracking. "Mary from the book club said Jennifer told everyone you've accumulated $15,000 in violations." My legs nearly gave out. $15,000? That's impossible. "They're saying you've had violations dating back 3 years that were never addressed," Grace continued. "They've got paperwork showing warning letters they claim were sent." "I never received any warnings before last week," I said, my mouth dry with fear. "I know, dear. It's all made up. Mary said she couldn't believe it either, but Jennifer had fancy charts and graphs showing a history of non-compliance." I looked at the clock. 5:30 p.m. The meeting started at 7. I had just enough time. "Grace, thank you. Can you do me one more favor? Can you go to that meeting and text me what happens?" "Of course, dear. What are you going to do?" I grabbed my keys. "I'm bringing reinforcements." First, I called Officer Reynolds and explained the situation. Then, I called my lawyer, who agreed to meet me at the community center right away. I stopped at home just long enough to grab the folder containing all my property documents, surveys, and the security footage showing the board members breaking my lock. As I pulled into the community center parking lot at 6:55 p.m., I noticed almost every space was filled. They had rallied the entire neighborhood against me. For a moment, I sat in my car, heart pounding. I'd never been in a fight like this before. I wasn't rich or powerful like Jennifer. I didn't have connections or influence. All I had was the truth and the law on my side. Would that be enough? My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. They're saying terrible things about you. Jennifer is showing pictures of your gate and calling it hostile architecture. Robert is talking about community property values dropping. People are getting worked up. Come quickly. I stepped out of my car just as my lawyer pulled up. Behind him was Officer Reynolds in his patrol car, lights off but unmistakably present. Ready? My lawyer asked, briefcase in hand. I took a deep breath and nodded. Let's go set the record straight. The community center fell silent when we walked in. Over 50 neighbors sat in folding chairs, all eyes turning to stare at us. Jennifer stood at the front beside a projector screen, showing a close-up photo of my gate with angry red circles drawn around it. Her smile vanished when she saw my lawyer. "This is a private meeting," she announced loudly, "for homeowners only." "Perfect," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "I am a homeowner, and these gentlemen are my guests." Officer Reynolds nodded politely to the crowd. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My lawyer stepped forward. "Before you continue, I should inform everyone that this meeting violates your own HOA bylaws, which require a minimum of 2 weeks' notice for any official vote." Robert rushed to Jennifer's side, whispering urgently in her ear. Her face flushed red. "This is an emergency session," she insisted. "Special circumstances." "What emergency?" I asked, looking around the room. "A gate that's been in place for months? Or is the emergency that the police are investigating criminal property damage by board members?" Murmurs spread through the crowd. I could see confusion on many faces. My lawyer cleared his throat. "Additionally, I have documented evidence of harassment, vandalism, fraudulent violations, and discriminatory enforcement targeting my client specifically." Jennifer banged a gavel I hadn't noticed before. "This is out of order. We're here to discuss community access to the lake path, which has always been private property," I finished firmly. "And I have the surveys and property records to prove it." I held up my folder. A man in the back row stood up. "Jennifer, you told us this path was deeded to the community 20 years ago." Jennifer's eyes darted around the room. "Well, there's been a traditional easement." "No easement exists in the county records," my lawyer interrupted. "We checked thoroughly." Officer Reynolds chose this moment to step forward. "If I might add something," his calm, authoritative voice quieted the room instantly. "I'm currently investigating a case of criminal trespassing and vandalism at this property owner's gate. We have security footage and physical evidence." He held up a plastic evidence bag containing the destroyed pieces of my original lock. "We have fingerprints," he said simply. The room erupted. Neighbors turned to each other in shock. A woman near the front stood up angrily. "You said this homeowner was vandalizing community property," she shouted at Jennifer. "You never said anything about this being private land." Jennifer pounded her gavel desperately. "Order! We need order!" But the meeting was dissolving into chaos. My neighbor Thomas, a quiet accountant I'd barely spoken to before, approached me. "Is it true they broke into your property?" he asked, looking troubled. I nodded and showed him the security footage on my phone. His eyes widened. "They told everyone you were trying to block lake access that had been community property for decades," he said. "They even added $50 to our quarterly dues last year for lake path maintenance." Something clicked in my mind. Wait, they've been charging everyone for maintaining my private property? Thomas nodded grimly. "And they raised it again this year." My lawyer overheard this exchange and made a note. "That could constitute fraud," he murmured to me. Across the room, Grace was talking animatedly to a group of elderly neighbors, pointing occasionally in my direction. I could see heads nodding sympathetically. Jennifer, seeing she was losing control, tried a new tactic. "This is exactly what happens when outsiders move into established communities," she shouted over the noise. "They don't respect our traditions." The room quieted slightly as people turned to look at me. It was a desperate play to the community's fear of change. I took a deep breath and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "I'm not an outsider trying to change things. I'm a homeowner protecting my legal property rights. And I've discovered that your board has been charging all of you for access to and maintenance of property they don't own." Robert leaped up. "That's a lie. We have—" He stopped abruptly, looking at Jennifer for help. "We have documentation," Jennifer finished weakly. "Show us," called several voices at once. Officer Reynolds stepped forward again. "Actually, I'd be very interested in seeing that documentation as well. Could be relevant to our investigation." Jennifer's face had turned ashen. "This meeting is adjourned," she declared, gathering her papers hastily. But it was too late. The damage was done. Neighbors were approaching me in small groups, asking questions, sharing their own stories of run-ins with the board. They fined me $200 for having my garbage can out 12 hours early when my daughter was in the hospital, one woman told me tearfully. They rejected my fence permit 3 times, then approved the exact same design when I hired Jennifer's brother's company to build it, added another. As the crowd thinned, Thomas approached me again, this time with a serious expression. "I'm an accountant," he said quietly, "and I've always wondered about the HOA finances. They haven't published detailed statements in years, just summaries. If they've been charging for path maintenance on private property, then where did that money actually go?" My lawyer overheard this and pulled me aside. "We should file for discovery of all HOA financial records," he suggested. "If there's financial impropriety on top of everything else, this could be much bigger than a dispute over a gate." Officer Reynolds joined our huddle. "I've taken statements from several witnesses who saw board members tampering with your property. We have enough to proceed with charges if you want to press them." I looked around the room. Jennifer and the other board members had disappeared, but most of my neighbors remained, talking in small clusters, occasionally glancing my way. This wasn't just about my gate anymore. This was about a community that had been manipulated and deceived. "I want to press charges," I decided, "and I want to see those financial records." As we left the community center, Grace hurried up to walk beside me. "You were wonderful," she said, patting my arm. "So brave." "Thank you for warning me," I replied. "I couldn't have done this without you." She smiled mischievously. "Oh, I'm not done yet. I've been keeping notes on every board meeting for the past 5 years. Every inconsistency, every strange decision. I never thought I'd have a chance to use them." I looked at her with newfound respect. "Grace, would you be willing to share those notes with my lawyer?" Her eyes twinkled. "I thought you'd never ask." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't expected. A sense of purpose. This fight wasn't just for me anymore. It was for Grace, for Thomas, for every neighbor who'd been bullied and misled. The battle for my gate had uncovered something much darker lurking in our pleasant community. And now, with allies at my side, I was determined to bring it all to light. The next morning, I sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, watching Jennifer fidget nervously as my lawyer spread documents across the table. What had started as a simple gate dispute was about to blow the lid off something much bigger. "Your Honor," my lawyer began, "during discovery, we found disturbing financial irregularities that directly connect to this case." Jennifer's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. This is about a property line dispute, not finances." The judge peered over his glasses. "I'll allow it. These documents were properly submitted during discovery." My heart pounded as my lawyer clicked to the first slide. It showed a glossy HOA brochure with a photo of my lakefront path, labeled Community Lake Access. I'd never seen this brochure before. For 7 years, my lawyer explained, the HOA has been advertising my client's private property as a community amenity. They've increased dues 3 times, citing maintenance costs for this path. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of neighbors who'd come to watch. Grace, my elderly neighbor, gasped loudly. Furthermore, my lawyer continued, we've uncovered payments totaling $127,000 to a company called Lakeside Maintenance LLC. This company has no employees, no website, and no business license. Its bank account, however, shows transfers to Jennifer's personal account. Jennifer's face turned ghostly white. Her lawyer whispered frantically in her ear. Robert, the HOA treasurer, slumped in his seat. Outside during the recess, neighbors surrounded me. They raised our dues $200 last year for that path, Thomas said, his face red with anger. I had to pick up an extra shift each month to afford it. Grace touched my arm, her eyes teary. When my husband died, I fell behind on dues. Jennifer threatened to foreclose on my house over $340. Now I know why they needed the money so badly. Detective Wilson approached with a thick folder. We've been investigating the HOA board for 3 months based on tax irregularities. Your case just gave us the final pieces we needed. When court resumed, Jennifer's lawyer requested a private meeting with the judge. 20 minutes later, the judge returned. Based on new information, the district attorney is filing criminal charges against Jennifer Lewis, Robert Thompson, and Diane Miller for embezzlement, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. Court officers will take them into custody. As Jennifer was led away in handcuffs, she locked eyes with me. This isn't over, she hissed. That evening, news vans lined our street. My phone rang constantly. The story had caught fire. A small gate dispute had uncovered years of corruption. A court-appointed administrator called an emergency HOA meeting the following week. The community center was packed. People stood along the walls, their faces showing a mix of anger and disbelief. The administrator laid out the full scope of the fraud. Beyond the path issue, the board had created 6 fake vendor companies that billed for work never performed. They'd skimmed from the reserve fund. They'd even taken kickbacks from the actual landscaping company. What happens now? Someone shouted. First, we'll elect a new board, the administrator said. Second, we'll conduct a full audit to see if funds can be recovered. Third, we'll review all violation notices from the past 3 years, as many appear to be retaliatory or fraudulent. My neighbor Thomas stood up. I propose we nominate Grace for the new board. She questioned their spending last year, and they nearly ruined her. Grace blushed as people clapped. I'll do it, she said, if someone helps me learn the financial parts. I'm an accountant, said a man I'd never met. I'll help. As the meeting continued, I slipped outside for fresh air. Detective Wilson followed me. You should know, he said quietly. We found a journal in Jennifer's home office. She had a list of problem homeowners with plans to force them out. Your name was at the top, with notes about catching you on violations until you'd be forced to sell. I shivered despite the warm evening. Why me? I hardly knew her before the gate issue. Your property is the largest on the lake, he said. According to her notes, she has a friend who's a developer. They had plans. From inside, I heard cheering. Looking through the window, I saw Grace standing at the podium, her thin shoulders straight with new confidence. The detective handed me a business card. The DA will call you tomorrow. This case goes deeper than anyone realized. People in high places were involved. Are you ready for that? I thought of Grace nearly losing her home, of Thomas working extra shifts, of the countless neighbors who'd been bullied and cheated. Yes, I said, watching the sunset reflect off the lake that had started it all. Some gates need to stay closed, but the truth? That gate needed to swing wide open. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of depositions, interviews, and court appearances. I'd never planned to become the center of a case that made the national news. Here I was, sitting in the district attorney's office, reviewing my testimony one final time. "You've been incredibly helpful," Monsieur Rodriguez, the lead prosecutor, said. "Your detailed records turned this from a simple fraud case into something much bigger." I nodded, thinking back to my grandfather's advice about keeping everything in writing. I never expected my habit of saving emails would expose corruption in the city council. She smiled grimly. The connection between Jennifer, Councilman Walsh, and Walsh Development Company would have stayed hidden if you hadn't pushed back on that gate. Outside, spring had arrived at Maple Springs Community. Fresh flowers lined the pathways, new play equipment gleamed in the common area, and the community center sported a fresh coat of paint. As I walked home, neighbors waved and called greetings. The same people who'd avoided eye contact a year ago now stopped to chat. Thomas jogged over from his yard. "Did you hear? The recovery company found another account. We're getting back almost 60% of the stolen funds." "That's amazing," I said. "What will the new board do with it?" Thomas grinned. "Grace proposed a real community lake access on the north side. It'll be nicer than your path ever was. No offense." "None taken," I laughed. At home, I found an official letter from the court. The restitution hearing had been scheduled. Jennifer, Robert, and Diane had all taken plea deals, avoiding jail time but agreeing to significant community service and repayment plans. My doorbell rang. Grace stood there with a folder and a basket of muffins. "Board meeting prep," she explained, setting down the muffins. "I never thanked you properly for what you did." "You're the one who stepped up to lead," I said. She shook her head. "For showing me that standing up for what's right matters. I was so scared of them for years that I just paid whatever they demanded. Now I'm helping run things." We spread the documents across my kitchen table. The new board had established clear, fair processes. Violations now required photographic evidence and board review. Financial statements were posted monthly. Every vendor contract had been rebid. "How's your gate doing?" Grace asked with a twinkle in her eye. "Wonderful," I said. "Quiet. Boring. Exactly as a gate should be." Later that afternoon, as Grace left, I noticed a moving truck at Jennifer's old house. Her family had relocated after the scandal broke. A young couple with 2 children were directing movers. The little girl spotted me and waved enthusiastically. Despite everything, I felt hopeful for these newcomers. That evening, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, something I'd avoided for years. The community center buzzed with conversation as Grace called the meeting to order. "First item," she said, "the Lake Access Project. Construction begins next month, and we're under budget thanks to Thomas negotiating with contractors." People applauded as Thomas showed the plans. The new access point would include a fishing dock, picnic area, and kayak launch, far better than my narrow path had ever been. After the meeting, I lingered, watching neighbors chat in groups. Detective Wilson appeared at my side. "Thought you'd want to know. Councilman Walsh resigned today. The investigation into the development kickbacks is expanding to 3 other council members." "Will it never end?" I asked, amazed at how far the ripples had spread. He shrugged. "Corruption is like a weed. Pull one, find 10 more below the surface. This neighborhood? You folks pulled the whole root system." As we walked toward the parking lot, he added, "By the way, the FBI's Public Corruption Unit has some questions about county zoning officials. Would you be willing to speak with them?" I hesitated, thinking of the months of stress, the threatening letters, the vandalism to my house during the height of it all. "Yes," I finally said. "Some fights are worth having." At home, I walked down to my lake path and unlocked my gate. The water glittered under the moonlight. A year ago, I'd fought for this strip of land out of principle. Now I understood it had never really been about the gate at all. My phone chimed with a text from Grace. "Board approved your garden expansion unanimously. Congrats." I smiled, remembering how I'd properly submitted the form, included the required diagrams, and presented at the meeting. The system was working as it should: fair, transparent, and reasonable. From across the lake came the sound of laughter, a neighborhood barbecue at the community park. Next year, they'd have their own lake access to enjoy. I locked my gate and headed back to the house, stopping to check my mailbox. Inside was a hand-addressed envelope. I opened it to find a thank you card signed by dozens of neighbors. Some people close gates, it read. Others open doors for an entire community. Thank you for being the second kind. Hope you enjoyed this story. If you'd like to hear more, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.